Hey everyone! Today we're diving deep into one of Brazil's most powerful and, let's be honest, most talked about institutions, the Supreme Federal Court, or as you'll hear it called, the STF. Now this court is always in the news, but what does it actually do? How did it get so much power? Well, we're going to break it all down. Okay, so to really get the STF, you have to start with this one core idea, this one powerful phrase: power curbs power. It sounds kind of philosophical, right? But it's not just a nice saying. It is literally the blueprint for Brazil's entire democracy. The whole system is built around this one goal, making sure no single part of the government gets too powerful.
So how do you actually make that happen? I mean, how do you put that idea into practice? Well, it's not just a gentleman's agreement. It's written, hardwired, right into the country's most important legal document.
And when I say hardwired, I mean it. The 1988 Constitution is super clear about this. It doesn't just hint at separating powers. No, it calls it a fundamental pillar of the state. This creates what's known in Portuguese as freios e contrapesos, or what we'd call checks and balances. Think of it like a three-way tug of war, where everyone is pulling just enough to keep the others from winning.
Right, so let's talk about these pillars. What are they? These are the three core branches of government, and each one has a very distinct job to do in this big balancing act. So here's how it breaks down. You've got the legislative branch, that's Congress. Their job, to make the laws and keep an eye on things. Then you have the executive, headed up by the president, and their job is to actually run the country and administer public affairs. And finally, you have the judiciary. They're the referees. They interpret the laws and apply them when there's a dispute. Each has its own lane, but they're all constantly interacting. It's this really delicate dance to keep everything in balance.
And that brings us to our main event, because right at the very top of that judicial pillar, you find the Supreme Federal Court, the STF.
And let me tell you, this title, Guardian of the Constitution, it's not just for show. It's their entire mission. Their number one, most important job is to make sure everyone follows the rules laid out in the Brazilian Constitution. Every single law passed, every action taken by the government, it all has to pass the Constitution test. And who's the final judge of that test? Yep, the STF.
So who are the people who get to do this incredibly important job? Well, it's a very exclusive club. We're talking about just 11 members who are called ministers, and the requirements to get in, they are tough. You have to be a native-born Brazilian, you have to have what they call notable legal knowledge, so you got to know your stuff, and, this one's huge, you need a spotless reputation. The idea here is to build a court that is both brilliant and totally impartial.
And how they get the job is a perfect example of that whole checks and balances thing we talked about. So step one, the president picks someone. But that's not the end of it. Step two, that person has to go before the federal Senate and get approved by a majority. So you see, the executive and the legislative have to agree. And once a minister is in, they're in for the long haul. They serve until they're 75. This lifetime appointment is designed to protect them from political wins, so they can make decisions without worrying about who's in power today or tomorrow.
Now, the court wasn't always like this. It has a pretty interesting history. It actually started way back in 1891, and back then it had 15 judges. It wasn't until 1931 that they settled on the 11 ministers we have today. Then in 1960, it packed its bags and moved from Rio to the brand new capital, Brasilia. But the really big moment, the one that made the STF what it is today, was in 1988. That's when the new Constitution came in and formally handed it this huge job of being the guardian.
All right, so we know their job is to be the guardian, but how do they actually do that? What kind of powers do they have? Let's open up their toolkit and see what's inside.
Okay, when it comes to checking if laws are constitutional, the court basically has two main ways of doing it, and you really need to get both to understand just how far their influence goes.
On one hand, you have what's called diffuse control. Think of this as something any judge, anywhere in Brazil, can do. If a judge in a specific case thinks a law is unconstitutional, they can choose not to apply it, but that decision only affects the people involved in that one case. It's a small-scale fix. But then, you have concentrated control, and this is the STF's superpower. This power is exclusive to them. They can look at a law, not in a specific case, but in the abstract, and if they decide it's unconstitutional, bam, that decision applies to everyone, everywhere in the country. It's a game changer.
And that's not all, not by a long shot. Their list of responsibilities is huge. They're the ones who judge direct challenges to laws. These are called ADIs. They're the only court that can prosecute the president or members of Congress for regular crimes.
They handle extradition requests from other countries, and they can issue something called summulas vinculantes, which are basically binding rules that every other judge and government official in the country has to follow. So yeah, their reach is just immense.
Now, with great power comes, well, you know the rest. And a power this big, the power to strike down a law passed by elected officials, needs a serious safety mechanism. So to declare a law unconstitutional, it's not enough to get a simple majority of whoever shows up. You need an absolute majority. That means at least 6 of the 11 ministers have to agree. This rule makes sure that overturning a law is always a big deal, a decision that has strong support within the court itself.
So we've talked about what they do, but how much do they do? Let's take a look at some numbers from 2023 to get a feel for their workload. And just a warning, these numbers are pretty wild.
Okay, get this. In 2023 alone, the STF made over 100,000 decisions. That's 101,970 to be exact. Just think about that volume. It's incredible.
And the pipeline is just constantly full. In that same year, almost 80,000 new cases were filed with the court. What that tells you is just how many of Brazil's biggest, most complex issues eventually wind their way up to the STF for a final answer.
So what kind of cases are we talking about here? Well, if you look at the breakdown, the biggest chunk by far, around 54,000 of them, are these extraordinary appeals. That's basically when someone thinks a lower court got a constitutional question wrong. But look at the rest. You've got thousands of habeas corpus cases, which are about personal freedom, and thousands of other complaints. It just goes to show you, they're dealing with the entire spectrum of legal and social issues every single day.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together. We have the structure, we have the immense power, we have this unbelievable workload. What does it all add up to? What is the STF's final role in Brazil's democracy?
You know, I think this quote from the National Council of Justice just nails it. It says the STF is the judiciary's final word on the constitutionality of laws in Brazil. Think about that. A law can go through the whole democratic process, debated and passed by Congress, signed by the president, but it's still not the end of the story. The STF gets the last say. They decide if it lives or dies.
And that right there is why all of this is so incredibly important. That power to review laws is the ultimate check. It's the backstop for the entire system. It means that no matter how much power the legislative or executive branches have, they can never overstep the one document that rules them all, the Constitution.
Which of course leaves us with a really big question, doesn't it? The STF exists to curb power, to be the final guardian. But it leads you to wonder, who guards the guardians? In any democracy, thinking about how to keep that final power balanced is a crucial, ongoing conversation. And it's pretty amazing to think about the incredible weight of that responsibility resting on the shoulders of just 11 people.